Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role-playing games. I'm Chris Salzman.
And I'm Andy Rao.
Andy, it is the end of summer.
It is the end of summer.
It is the close of our summer of experiments, although let's be honest, we'll probably just keep doing them as we want to.
Yeah.
How do you think it went? Are you glad that we did the summer of experiments?
I am glad that we did the summer of experiments.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe it's already over.
Yeah.
For all sorts of reasons. But yeah, I thought we did some interesting stuff. I think both of us often have an interest in trying out some new stuff, but we're generally happy, with the default format of the show. So it was nice to have an excuse to try a few things without committing to any sort of significant change of format.
Yeah, so now we'll just start like 10 spin-off podcasts, I think, from this.
Well, obviously, but yes.
Yeah. So we're gonna try to get back to somewhat normal schedule. I think we have a goal of getting on some new guests, having on some guests that we've had in the past, and kind of just doing all the normal stuff. This podcast has been going like 2 years, so it's not like we have too many like holidays and traditions and stuff. But
I have a goal, Chris, of having you on the show. And also you as a guest with like two different voices.
Okay, yeah.
So, listeners, when you notice that starts to happen, you know that it's time to close down the podcast. We're done.
Yes, yeah. One of us won't be able to make it. Another one will just try to pretend to be
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, we were chatting in the Discord today, and someone brought up the Hardcore History podcast, which I know a lot of people listen to this podcast also like that one. And I'm in awe of that guy and just his ability to talk by himself for seemingly hours and hours. It's amazing. Like it's hard enough for like us to have a conversation for 30 minutes, but yeah. Okay, so I had a couple things that I want to talk about before we get into the topic at hand. The first one, I think this might go pretty quickly, but so I just finished a book that I really liked that a number of people had recommended. It was called Gideon the Ninth.
Yes.
Yes, which was super good. I know that you enjoyed it. I know some other
it.
people have not liked that book at all, which is great. That's actually, to me, always a sign of a good book when there's kind of a split opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really enjoyed it. This was the first book that I got sucked into, and just had to do, cleared my schedule and just read as much as possible. Probably the first book that's happened to me in 2 or 3 years or so. It's been like a long time since I've gotten into something like that.
I had a really similar experience. I read it, I think, at the beginning part of this year, and I had read some good stuff in the last year, but this was a book that when I wasn't reading it, I wished I were reading it,
Yeah.
It's one of those books where you're like, it's, on my lunch break, maybe I'll just go read this book instead of...
Yeah, it's good. I'm trying to figure out, why exactly I liked it. And, I think, the writing is very strong, of course. But it reminded me of a number of different series that I really liked. There was some elements of Harry Potter. There was some elements of, the Hunger Games and stuff in there. Just some, I don't know, just lots of really great stuff. But the thing that I wanted to talk about on this podcast, and we're going to not veer too hard into spoilers, I think, at all. So if you have not read the book, don't worry, we're not going to spoil anything. The descriptions that the author did for a lot of the action sequences in there, and I mentioned this to you a little bit earlier today, all those descriptions really reminded me of what happens when you play a theater of the mind game, at the table, right? So when you don't have minis and stuff and you're just trying to describing the action. And I found it really enjoyable to read that. Often when I'm playing Theater of the Mind, it's me who's GMing that style and trying to explain everything. So it was fun to get a written account of how would you describe a very complex action scene that has multiple people doing different things and lots of other environmental stuff happening. So I thought if you're looking for good inspiration about how to maybe approach that, I would recommend reading this book.
That's interesting. Can we poke at that a little bit? Because I would have said there was no part of Gideon the Ninth that I did not enjoy. But the part I probably enjoyed least was the kind of extended action sequence that made up the last part that I think you're talking about. There's a very epic combat, and it does have a lot of the stuff that makes for a great role-playing encounter. Like you said, the characters are all very memorable. there's numerous different characters that want different things out of the conflict. So it's not just that they're all trying to kill each other. They have different motivations, and there's a lot of cool environmental stuff. That said, I struggled to follow what was going on, and I kind of did that thing where I just sort of skipped a little bit into skim mode, paying enough attention that I knew, I had a gist of what was happening, but I could not have described to you, like, what are the specific things that people did and where did they move and stuff. Did you have that experience or no?
Yes, and I think this is really interesting that you brought that up, because one thing that I found when you play Theater of the Mind games is there's a lot of re-explanation of what just happened, or like what the current state of the table is. Right, and I think that's a weakness of it, and the problem is that like actually imagining something in a three-dimensional space is pretty hard, and like some people actually can't do it at all, right? Like it's just they just flat out can't do that. That's nothing, against them. It's just that's how their brain works. I'm not very spatially oriented either, right? So it's sort of hard for me to do that too, although I find it like it's an enjoyable challenge to try to sort through that. So when I was reading those action sequences, what I found was I would get into that skim mode and I'd stop myself and slow way down and go back and reread like the last page and try to figure it out. Like figure out what was going. And it was very rewarding to do that for me because like it is actually it's pretty well scripted, right? Like everything does make sense when you think about it. And it reminded me a lot of reading Lord of the Rings. And if you read Lord of the Rings, there's just all these descriptions of them going places and stuff and descriptions of the road and stuff. And it can be very boring unless you stop and sort of think about like what Tolkien's doing, right? Like he's describing the actual journey that they're taking. But like if you're not really thinking hard about like what that is, it can get just really dry and you're not really following it. That's where like visual mediums are just much better at showcasing some of that stuff. But I would say like in Gideon the Ninth, right? Like just taking my time like and kind of reading it, not skimming, like it was rewarding. I'm not saying that I'm a perfect reader and I did that all the time, right? Like there's definitely times where it's just like, okay, like I know they're having some sort of battle, like there's some sort of fight going on, like I'm just going to kind of see who rises to the top at the end of it.
Well, good. I'm glad. Thanks for kind of sharing that insight into the book. When I was reading, I didn't read it because it was adjacent to RPGs, but it felt pretty RPG adjacent to me, in that just had a really vibrant cast of characters that felt like the sort of PCs you would wind up with if you were like, all right, everyone, we're going to do sort of a murder mystery in space. Come, make a weird, make a cool character. I feel like you would wind up with the diversity of weirdos that are in Gideon the Ninth.
There's tons of good NPC ideas in there too, if you ever need one.
So here's a question. So you and I both noted that there's a lot of like basically NPCs in the book, but you gotta kind of keep track of them because you can't skip learning who all the NPCs are, and they have different allegiances, and it's important like which house they're a member of. And so in this book there was a very helpful list of characters at the beginning, and usually when I see those in like a fantasy novel, it's like a major like ooh like I don't think I like this book. In this case, I committed to using that list of characters, and it was very helpful. But I guess have you ever run a game where there were so many NPCs that it was a legitimate struggle for the table to keep track of them? And if so, how did you handle it? And I'm thinking, I know you ran a game, you played in a game of Eternal Lies, and knowing the GM of that game, I'm guessing there were a lot of different NPCs that kind of circled in and out of the story. How did you guys handle all that?
So Matt, who ran the game, he would give us like character portraits whenever anyone was introduced. Like anytime there was a named character, we'd get a card that had a picture of sort of like what he thought they looked like and their name. And so he would often pull from like celebrities as well. So we could have like, oh, like this guy looks like, I don't know, like Antonio Banderas or whatever. Like, like so you know who that is. Yeah. You can kind of put a name to the face really quickly. It was, I would say, like that was a rewarding part of that campaign, was trying to keep track of the NPCs, like, and that was part of the game, was figuring out like who was who and like who was involved in various parts of it. If you tried to graph that onto say like a D&D dungeon delve, like that wouldn't work, right? Because that's like it'd be this whole complex system that like you don't quite want to interact with. As far as like games that I've run, whenever I run a game, reminding the PCs of like who the NPCs are is often just you have to reintroduce them quite a bit, unless the party itself has created the NPC, right?
Yeah.
Like, they befriended the small goblin
of
or
course,
whatever,
yeah.
and named it. Like they're just gonna kind of forget. It's just part of it. Related to this, I've become very interested, or I guess like all the characters that I make now have super simple names. I think I used to go for more like high fantasy, 3 to 5 syllable names. And like everybody is just like super simple. Like it's got to relate back to what they do, in some way. Like it's hard enough remembering the people I have to interact with every day in real life. Like I don't need the extra burden in my
absolutely.
games. What about you? Have you ever had that experience where it's just hard to keep track of everybody?
I definitely have. It tends to happen in Call of Cthulhu, any sort of extended Call of Cthulhu thing. You'll eventually find yourself with a large number of NPCs. Yeah, I do something similar to what Matt described. I keep a picture of the NPC on hand, and I brandish it as a visual aid whenever needed. Some Call of Cthulhu published stuff is good about including a portrait of each NPC. Not all of them do, but when not, look for an actor or something like that. Visual aid. That said, I haven't given it much thought beyond that fairly straightforward solution. So
yeah, I'd say like going back to Gideon a bit, like you mentioned they're all a bunch of like weirdos. Like the nice thing about like kind of a fantasy sci-fi setting like that is you can give them like a very two-dimensional personality that they sort of end up making three-dimensional as you play.
Yep.
Right? Like you can be like, oh, you're just you're the people who are like whatever, hyper, like super into books, right? Like that's your whole thing. Like, and you name one of the guys like the book tender or the librarian or something like that. It's just like, oh, like we're gonna go talk to the librarian whose name is librarian, who's super into books, and like then you can flesh out the character from there. Like I like that idea. It seems a little, thin, I guess, when you describe it, but I think at the table it can work really well.
Yeah.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you think about Gideon, it absolutely is the case that while the characters do wind up being pretty interesting and three-dimensional characters, for a lot of the time that you're first getting to know them, they really could be described as, oh, that is the blank person, like the sickly person, and that is the like stuck-up person, and that is so everybody had a little bit of an over-the-top personality characteristic that you could cling to until you actually got to know them well enough to remember them.
Yeah. Like Shakespeare did it too, so it's not
that's right.
Not a big deal.
It's all fair game. So I know you had something else you wanted to mention, but I thought I would mention something RPG adjacent that I've been listening to lately, and I've been listening to a podcast about modern blockbusters and why the way that modern blockbuster films are made results in kind of consistently mediocre pieces of art. And
interesting.
It's an interesting podcast. It's by the Cracked guy. I forget his name, but anyway, he's written a lot of fun stuff over the years. But I mention this because among the many topics they discuss, they were talking about how so many movies have very big, kind of exciting action sequences that have all of the ingredients that you would want in a big action scene. And if you were like creating it as an RPG scenario, they have all the right ingredients in it. A cool location, memorable villains, all sorts of exciting stuff going on. But we've all had that experience of watching like an incredibly over-the-top action scene that lacked any sort of meaningful tension. And so they were comparing two moments from different Jurassic Park movies. So do you remember in the first Jurassic Park movie, there's that scene towards the end where the girl is in the kitchen while the velociraptors are stalking like down the kitchen aisle?
Yeah, Andy, I could probably like reenact that entire scene from memory.
Yes.
It's so good.
It's a wonderful scene as far as tension goes. And in that scene is very scary. It's one of the more memorable scenes when you think Jurassic Park. You probably remember the velociraptor, pushing the door handle down and starting to walk into the kitchen, right? And they were contrasting it with a scene in one of the recent like Jurassic Park, Jurassic World movies where everything in the scene was cranked up to 11 and you would think that you're in for a really amazing experience. They're like rolling around in like one of those hamster ball transports. I don't know. It's hard. I don't know what the term is.
Hamster ball's a good name for it. I'm sure
they're being chased by like whatever mega version of the T-Rex is is in this, the latest movie,
Mm-hmm.
and it's throwing them around and kicking them and biting them, and they're crashing into trees and they're flying through the air, and they go over a waterfall at one point, and then at the end of the scene, the characters, as they exit this exciting action scene, they're doing like lighthearted quips. And
Mm-hmm.
at no point in that scene, and I have seen that movie and I would agree with this, no point in that scene is there even the remotest hint that anybody could get hurt or that anything is really at stake in the scene.
Mm,
And
yeah.
you contrast that with the original Jurassic Park one with just it's a much narrower scale of action sequence, but it's like 10 times more effective. I think a lot about stakes in role-playing games, especially with games like Blades in the Dark and the Apocalypse World type games that make really explicit goal out of establishing stakes and making stakes clear to players. So what makes certain scenes feel like they have real stakes, and why don't you get better stakes just by like upping the volume on everything? It's just an interesting question. Just one more bit of babbling. So one thing that it occurred to me is, in that first Jurassic Park movie, the one with the really good tent scene, they spent a lot of time prepping you for this scene by telegraphing and sometimes having characters explicitly say things, they've established really clearly if one of these things, comes after you, you're in big trouble. And they've established that they're scary because the characters act scared of these creatures throughout the whole movie. They do the work of setting this up. And as you watch the movie, you're starting to get tense in a sense, because inevitably they're going to have an encounter with one of these things that the movie keeps scaring you about, and then that scene arrives and you're so prepped, you're so filled with tension and fear already that it feeds right into it. Like the scene just doesn't even have to work at that point to generate tension, because I've been rambling on about this, but it made me think about how to make stakes more meaningful, and maybe by trying to do more deliberate laying the groundwork for encounters before they arrive. So any thoughts on my long monologue there?
I mean, mostly, like, I feel like I say this every other episode, Jurassic Park is just such a good movie. But,
it really is. It holds
but I
up
mean, like,
very well, too.
just mentioning, like, all the build-up. I mean, like, every interaction with the raptors feeds into that scene so well. Yeah, everything that they've done, they talk about, like, how they're testing everything, like, like, you can see them doing that in there, and that they hunt in packs and stuff, and there's, like, multiple raptors in there. Like, it's all just really amazing. I think that scene, too, even happens in sort of, like, their, like, the safe building that they were in, right? Like, and I think that's the first time that they break through and stuff. But I was also just thinking that we just watched the new Space Jam movie, which is... Whew, what a movie. We could probably do a whole podcast just on that. I know that there's probably 3,000 podcasts that have been done just talking about that movie. But that is a movie in which the stakes are at one point literally that hundreds of thousands of people will get trapped inside of the serververse forever. And that LeBron James will have to play basketball against this, this like ghost in the machine forever, right? Like those are the stakes. Like this is terrifying stakes, and you feel no tension whatsoever, like at all when this is laid out. It's just like it is that sort of thing. It's like a blockbuster has like all these component pieces to this thing, like this situation that should be terrifying, but they're playing it off as like this delightful little like basketball game that they're going to play inside of there. Just like no one's putting forth the actual effort to like elevate the movie at all, other than Don Cheadle in that movie, who just like he carries the whole thing. But like it's you watch a movie like that and like you come away from it like not really feeling like you know anything more about humanity at all. Like whereas that scene in the kitchen with the raptors, like you sense the fear and like you think about like what you would have done in that scenario and stuff. Like it's very hard to put yourself in the place, I think, of a lot of characters inside of these blockbusters and stuff.
In a lot of episodes, it is a common topic to come up in this podcast of, how do you make scenes and encounters more interesting, or how do you make battles more interesting? And we have offered advice, good and bad, and we've had guests come on and share some really good insights. But, a lot of our answers to that question tend to be put interesting stuff into it, Yeah. And I guess now I am just thinking of questioning that advice a little bit and wondering if the real thing you need to do to make your encounters better is to ask yourself, why is this encounter so important that we have to play, why is this so important, and why will it be a disaster, if this encounter goes wrong, or something like that. What are the stakes going in? And if you can't think of very compelling stakes, if it doesn't really matter whether the PCs win or lose or whatever, then maybe it doesn't need to be a scene, or maybe you can just handle it in a more abstract or a different way, right?
Yeah, it's tough though, because so a movie has the advantage of having some space to tell a story, to set things up. I don't know how exactly you would do that in a role-playing game. Like how do you keep on telling stories about what raptors could do without showing them? And I'm not saying there's no way to do it, but it is just making me think about that. How would you drop these clues about this impending threat?
Yeah.
And have it show up in places and stuff like that, and lead up to this final confrontation. How can you do that in a satisfying way without the party just being we'll just go hunt the raptors?
Right.
We're level 15 wizards. We're just gonna go kill all the raptors. There's modify to fit whatever your scenario is.
Right.
But
right.
Yeah, I mean, it does make me, it's a fantastic question. I think you're asking, it's well, do you even need to do it?
Yeah.
Then if it's not a compelling, not something where the stakes are felt.
There's, another challenge RPGs have, especially D&D style ones, is that, so much of D&D, a typical D&D game, is specifically fairly low stakes encounters, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I think the game explicitly, suggests throughout multiple editions of this game, you pepper the PCs with low stakes, not a big deal combat. It kind of wears away at their resources or whatever, and then you save the big guns for a meaningful encounter at the end or something like that. And, in a typical D&D fight against goblins or whatever, nobody is really under the illusion in most D&D games I've ever played that, everyone's going to die or something, or that everything's going to fall apart if they don't handle this in precisely the right way. And I'm not critiquing that, because that's in D&D for a purpose, but it also seems to fill your games with a lot of stuff that is just by default not really going to have a lot of energy, emotional investment in it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you almost have to design a system, and I'm sure there's systems like this that exist, and I actually want to look into this and see what they are. In a lot of action movies that I think we would both appreciate, right? What happens is the characters sort of gain savvy and knowledge about their situation, or courage, things like that, even while they might be taking damage and breaking arms and legs, getting scraped up, those sorts of things, right? So their physical prowess and maybe even some of their skills are going down as some of those softer skills are going up at the same time. And so it culminates in them having the courage to do this bold and brave thing, even though that they're badly hurt. Contrast that again, with the D&D, the idea is more no, we're going to just keep on leveling up until we are so powerful that we can walk in. We have all these new skills that we can take on this new conflict that we have in front of us. Yeah, think about Jurassic Park. If when those kids in the kitchen, by the time they'd gotten there, if they had leveled up and they had Gatling guns or something, it's come on, raptors, you and me, right? It'd be a very different kind of movie at that point. But that's sort of that would be the track that a role-playing game would probably take to get to there. It's well, you found the cool gun, and you figure it out, you got some high jump boots, and those sorts of things. But, yeah.
Well, anyway, I don't want to derail us too much on that, but I know you had one other thing you wanted to bring up. So
so I can bring it up, and I think this will take the rest of our time, or we can roll on the table, and I can save it for another day. What do you want, Andy?
Oh my! I think that you should just bring. This is our final. We'll call this our final summer episode, and so we're just gonna. We're going to shake our fist at the conventions of this podcast format, and we're just going to talk about what's on your mind. Listeners, we did not roll for any topic. We are just thinking of topic on this episode.
I apologize. We'll get back to our normal
if you want to roll the dice, for no reason, if that would make you happy, go ahead, Chris.
It would. But okay, so I, a couple of weeks ago, or a month or two ago, I guess at this point, I got together with my family. We did a little like family reunion thing for a weekend, which was super fun. And while I was there, I ended up playing D&D with one of my nieces. So we had some time one of the nights, and I brought the Essentials kit with me. And I just like put it on a table. I was like, I'll just see who gets interested in it. So she saw it and she immediately like gravitated towards like, oh, D&D, like I've always wanted to play like D&D, and got super excited about it. I was like, okay, cool. Well, we're going to find some time to do it. It was very hard to find the time to do it, but I'm glad that we did. So we sat down, and so she's never played before. She's just heard about it. You know, she's in high school stuff. So I'm sure lots of people that she knows have played it and stuff, and she doesn't have any friends that are interested in playing it with her right now. So I was like, okay, we'll create a character, we'll do like a little scenario and stuff. It's gonna be great. So we sat down to make a character, and so I was trying to do the right thing. I was like, we're just gonna use what's in the box. Like, I'm not gonna pull up some sort of character creator.
Yeah.
And stuff.
Where you're like, okay, now go to D&D Beyond and make an account. And then,
exactly. Yeah. Which we'll get to that in a second. But
okay. I can't
so the Essentials kit does not come with pre-made characters, which is a mistake, I think.
Okay.
I think
that is a surprise. And that's such an obvious mistake. I don't know how that got out like the warehouse.
Yeah. Yeah. If there are pre-made characters in there, like I must have removed them at some point. Like I've had the box for a little bit or something like. There wasn't one in there that I could find. I was also very tired, but so for whatever, anyway, we had a blank character sheet. I handed that to her, and we had the book of like the standard rules and stuff. And like it attempts to walk you through how to make a character. I'm going to try to not rant about this too much. I'm going to bring it up as like a topic of discussion. There's another version of this specific podcast where it is like literally 40 minutes of me sort of just yelling about D&D.
That's our spin-off Shadowrun podcast.
Yeah.
Where we rant about Shadowrun and occasionally rant about other games like D&D. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, the world does not need more of those. Yeah, so like we, brand new player. Like I played, I've GM'd and stuff, and I am trying to walk through this book to help her create a character. And it is just a mess. Like your character sheet, like, and I think this strikes me every time that I create a character. You look at that character sheet and there's so many blanks and so many things to explain, and nothing makes sort of intuitive sense the first time you're looking at it unless you're going to the book to figure it out. So we spent, I think, probably like an hour and a half, maybe a little bit less than that. And there was some distractions and stuff from kids who needed bedtime stuff, but like just going through that book and trying to like piece together a character, and like you'd sort of expect that there'd be a top to bottom, like do this and this and this and this like that. And there just really isn't. Like you have to flip back and forth, and then you get to the end of it, and if you picked a spellcaster, then you're picking spells. And it's like, how do you explain to someone who's never played before, like which spells to use and stuff, right? And there's some suggestions about like what you should just do, like if you want to create a wizard, like do this. We went through it, and I think she had a really good time, and I had a really good time doing it too. And like it was fine. She got to roll some dice. She rolled for her stats, which was super fun. She picked out everything. She came up with a name and like gave it a little backstory and stuff. That part was fantastic, but I just kept on having this feeling of like what a barrier to put up for a first time player to have this thing. And if any part of that doesn't connect with them, that's just going to make them like turn away from the hobby in some way. So like that was a little bit disappointing, but it was fine, right? Like I could walk her through it. I don't know if I had just given her that and her friends made characters, if that would have gone well or not. I would like to think so, but I don't know. But anyway, so that was a whole thing. And I think like you mentioned D&D Beyond, and I think like part of the, I'm not going to call it problem, part of the interesting thing about creating characters now is like, I think there's this expectation that you have D&D Beyond, or you have an online character creator, or you're looking up things online and stuff. So there isn't as much work being put into maybe like that first run experience of reading through the book. Cause it's like, oh, you can just pop online and just download a character sheet there that's already filled in for you. Yeah. Or go to D&D and Beyond, and it'll just sort of take care of a lot of this setup stuff. For you, which like, I mean, I guess that's good and bad. Yeah. So I don't know, like I've got one other thing that I want to say, but I'll save it. So you have any thoughts? Or
just that I fully agree with you. This is a problem that I feel like D&D in particular has never really solved, which surprises me because there's super smart people designing these various editions of D&D, and there's a lot of cool ideas in not just, you know, the rules of D&D, but, you know, there's some D&D books that are well laid out and well thought out, but just for whatever reason, yeah, character creation, it's a mess of flipping from chapter to chapter, and it's just such an unfortunate thing. It's like probably the least amount of fun you're going to have playing with D&D, and it's the first thing you're going to do with D&D, right?
Yes.
Which is, and I suspect I'm not the only GM that whenever I play with like new people, I make their character for them in advance. Like I ask them to tell me a little bit about the kind of character they want to do, but I do not do the like, okay, everybody flip to page 14 and buy your equipment stuff at all. I would rather that they could participate in the character creation process, but I can't risk a 2-hour TDM fest, you know, while we flip around the one copy of the rule book gets passed around the table. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry, that ventured into rant, and neither of us likes ranting on the show about stuff because there's enough people talking about what sucks out there. So let me say a positive thing. My personal single favorite thing to come out of the like Apocalypse World and Blades in the Dark rule set. I don't know if they invented this, but it's certainly what I got out of it. The single best thing, better than any of the mechanics or the game settings, is I love the character playbooks, and I love that you create your character without referring to the book. You have your sheet in front of you, and it's like circle one of these 4, you know, what is your personality? And you don't have to think it up. You have to circle one of the 4 things that's there. And what is your, what nationality are you? Circle one of these. And then it's just like, put a check in next to which of these skills you want to start the game with. And they're all right there. Like it's fast and it's easy, and it does not result in less interesting or shallower characters at all. And I'm not saying that every game needs to do it that way, but that's my favorite thing out of like Band of Blades, of the Blades in the Dark and the Apocalypse World games.
Yeah, and I wonder if that works, because at least my experience is a lot of times when you're playing those games, you're playing with people that have played other role-playing games before.
Yep.
Like, I wonder if like that first run experience for someone who's never played an RPG would work as well. I think so, but I also have some suspicions that maybe there's a little bit of shared understanding about what a character sheet is that allows you to sort of jump to that point.
Yeah, for sure. Those games have the advantage of not having a kind of convoluted, intricate magic system, for example, with different rules for different types of casters and stuff like that. I mean, for sure they benefit because the rules themselves are a lot more lightweight. But I haven't played Dungeon World, but I've read it. And like the first time I read that, like your character sheet, you aren't even supposed to come up with like your own name. Like you're supposed to pick a name for your character if you know, from a list of options. And when I first read that, I was like, you gotta be kidding. What is this? What is this garbage? But I get it now. Like I totally get it. You can be up and running in like 5 minutes with that character, maybe even less.
It's absolutely true. And like, so I contrasting that experience making the characters with, you know, with my niece, just going back to something you said, you're absolutely right. Like, if a brand new player, like, you should just, if you know what's going on, like, you should just make the character for them, you know, like, kind of make some of the decisions and stuff. I was probably a little bit too loose with, like, oh yeah, like, you figure it, like, I'll help you make it, right? Versus me just being like, okay, like, I'm just gonna do it, and like, we'll, you know, you'll roll some dice and I'll tell you what's going on.
Yeah.
But anyway, so contrasting that experience with playing Dungeon Crawl Classics Funnel at the Roll for Topic Con that John Corey ran, I mean, was just like night and day, right? Like, so he had just pre-generated like a stack of 30 or so of these characters, you know, and just like, we each got 3 character sheets and name them and go. Character creation was non-existent. Like, there was no even decision given to us because it was just a random draw off the top of the deck. I would say that I don't think the role playing at the table suffered.
No,
really. Like, like, because you sort of, you make it work, I guess. Like, what you can't do is walk in with a 4-page backstory on your character. That's okay. I mean, honestly, like, you know, that's a whole other discussion. But yeah, like you don't walk in with a 4-page backstory. You don't have like the first 50 sessions of play sort of mapped out for this character, because they might not last for more than 10 minutes like that. But I mean, like, you can still role play. You can still imbue them with something interesting just with a couple bits of information.
Yeah.
Like, I like the maximalist approach of like a high fantasy role-playing game too, of like, yeah, let's stat out a bunch of stuff and have all these cool stuff, like all these cool spells and all this cool equipment and stuff. Like, that's super fun, but also having a pre-gen is super fun. Like, you know, so it's just like this like tension. And I don't know, like, I think this has me thinking a lot about like, how do you introduce someone new to the hobby? Is it a good thing to throw homework at them, homework in a complicated spreadsheet, as the first thing, or is it a good thing to say like, oh, let's throw complicated role playing at you as the first thing?
Well, you know, I mean, obviously it's going to depend on the person too, right? But
yeah,
I mean, one way to think about it is, you know, what is the purpose of that character creation process, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I haven't given this a lot of thought, so I'm just thinking off the top of my head here. But I mean, the purpose is to take the idea you have and generate rules that embody that idea in the language of the game. Mm-hmm. And that's why I make characters for newbies, because I want them to just worry about the idea, the character they want to roleplay. And I know the rules well enough to translate that into the numbers that they need, you know. I mean, there's certainly fun to kind of a lengthy character creation process sometimes, because, I don't know, it's kind of like a role-playing thing that, you know, like flipping through the book, you encounter ideas that maybe you hadn't thought of, or you notice ways that rules could be combined or used together. You know, there's certainly mm-hmm. something to that. But, you know, the average person probably just wants to play like an elf ranger or something, and
yeah,
it's too bad it takes so long to get to, okay, and here is your elf ranger character sheet.
Yes, it is too bad. I mean, like, I think, like, for me too, in that situation where we had a limited amount of time, I mean, this is the problem. This is every RPG session, right? You see the time ticking down, and you're like, oh no, we're not gonna have as much time as I wanted to do the fun thing.
Yeah.
That, like, I really wanted to get to, like, because it's just like, because you got to do the character creation part and stuff, yeah. So by the time we got to actually like playing the game, it's like, okay, cool. Like, we just went over all this stuff that is brand new to you. Now I have to teach you the rules, and then we're going to play like a quick session. That session went great. And I think, like, she had a lot of fun. I had a ton of fun.
Yeah.
You know, a couple of our family members wandered in and just sort of like listened in.
So that's awesome. Like, we should, we should, again, I feel like I've gotten a little negative on this episode.
Yeah,
like,
me too.
That is fantastic. Yeah. And I'm so glad that despite the very tedious sounding experience you described, it was like a really fun and memorable experience for you.
Yeah. Like, it was tedious more because I'm critical, right? Like, and that's, that's like, it's hard to turn off that part of my brain, too. And then, goodness, start a podcast about something and you'll start overthinking it. But, But yeah, like, you know, having people like sort of like wander in and like listen and stuff, which was like, that raised my anxiety too a little bit. It's like, you know, like, how do you perform D&D when your mom is listening, right? Like, you know, but yeah, so like playing it, like, and, you know, it was super engaging, and like she was making all sorts of fun decisions and stuff that was going into, and like we started to create this like story and stuff that was happening, and it's like, yeah, it's like, that's D&D, right? It's this magical experience, and like getting to share that with people for the first time is just like, that's such a privilege too. And like also with family, like it was a very cool experience. I'm not mad that I did it. Like, I am disappointed. Like, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated that like the character creation process was not this like super cool, super smooth process. And maybe the real response to this is that I need to spend some time thinking about like, how do you teach character creation in D&D?
Yeah.
Like, that could be one of the options, or another option is just like, okay, I just always will have pre-gens on me. Like, it's just going to be like a non-negotiable. Like, there are some pre-gens in every book and box that I bring with me.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but I mean, the answer probably is D&D Beyond, to start thinking of D&D Beyond or similar apps as the way that you create a character, rather than the old-fashioned, like, everybody turn to the list of classes on page 14. And if it happens again, I don't love it. I don't love D&D Beyond being like a part of the official D&D experience. Nothing against D&D Beyond, but it's got all sorts of paywalls. It introduces a whole like kind of world of commercial. It's a commercial app, but it does do the thing of like, I want an elf wizard, click, just give me an elf wizard. Well, giving me the option, but I want to go in and like fine tune its weapon proficiencies. It does it lets you do that too. So I was thinking about how video games often do this. When you play Fallout or whatever, they typically will be like, do you want to use one of these pre-made people, or are you one of those weirdos that wants to like tinker with all the skill points? And that's a little harder to do in a role-playing game unless you come to the session with like a stack of pre-generated characters, which you could do, and a lot of people probably just do that.
This is all like really good thoughts. Thank you for letting me sort of rant about that. I think I'm not going to call it a rant. I'm going to call it like I got hot and bothered about.
There you go. I was going to say, did you know, I don't know if John used this in your Dungeon Crawl Classics game, but do you know that you can buy a pad of character sheets for that game that have this like pre-generated characters, and you scratch off the
yes
stats? Is that what he used?
He did not use those. I've seen those. I think that was the first DCC thing I ever saw in person. I was like, you have to be kidding me. That's so cool.
It's wonderful.
So it's just like, it's the full character sheet, right? And then there's scratch off things like a lotto ticket. And so do you have like options of what you scratch off, or is it just like it's all your stats are just hidden behind these?
I think I don't remember. I think it's just your stats are hidden behind those, and the game can get by with it because it's pretty low complexity. Pretty low complexity game, but
I'm more and more attracted to that style of game where it's just like you're given your decisions to you, and then you have to make of them what you will. I don't know. I think maybe that's just like a 2021 fatigue setting in or whatever.
It does feel that way. Well, and I know that we need to wrap up here, but I was going to say, one reason games like GURPS and like the hero system are less appealing to me. I have a lot of kind of appreciation for those systems, but those, if you ever want to see a game where the work of getting from your idea to the mechanical implementation of that idea, those are where you will really feel that tension, because those are games that are like, you want to be a swordsman who casts fireball, you can do anything, but you're going to have to like figure out how to make that happen in exactly the way you want using this 200-page section of the rulebook. And when you're 15 in high school, that's amazing. But when you're when you're a few decades past that, it's kind of like, whew, that's like, where's D&D Beyond when you need it?
Where's the single click GURPS
creator? That's right. Okay, well, we should wrap up, Chris. Well, thanks for being willing to do one final, non-standard episode. And who am I kidding? Like, there will be more divergent episodes, but
of course,
well, I look forward. I know that we have a couple of people on our guest, potential guest list. I look forward to seeing what we can get rolling this fall. So
so I have one little thing that I wanted to say at the end. So we got a bunch of stickers printed up recently of our I guess our podcast art, which is just a D10, but then also our little tagline, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM. If you need another sticker in your life, let me know. I've got a bunch of them hanging out, and I will happily send you one for free. Just let me know. Let me know your address, and I'll ship one out to you if you are listening to this and you want one. So, all right, I think that's about it. We will be back next time. We have a guest lined up. I'm really excited. We've known him for a while. We've been trying to get him on for a long time. So hopefully that'll happen.
It's gonna be good.
But okay. All right, Andy, thanks so much for indulging me in all of my little rants about all the media stuff that I've been going through.
Well, likewise. So.
All right. Well, I've been Chris Salzman.
I've been Andy Rao.
And remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.